I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Lurie. And I got to start out by putting some respect on you and your show. Every time I tune in, you're talking about things that are real, and you're doing something that I think is really valuable because you're talking about things, you're analyzing things in a way that people can relate to, but you're also giving us facts. And I know we got to talk about my show, but I got to say, what you were just talking about in terms of representation and how that plays out, with this thing that our mayor is going through, I said, man, I was like, listen, when you talk about a word, I mean, listen, I forgot I was going to be on this show. I was just taking it in. What you said is, I think, the manifesto for that particular analysis, that because all these folks try to wrap themselves with other Black people to try to distract and do a 3-card Monty on us. And I love the way that I think our people know at this point, folks know that, skin folk ain't kinfolk, but it's like you really put it down. Thank you.
I appreciate you, because as much as we know it, I feel like we still have this multi-century process that is ingrained in us that we are reflexively going to protect and we're reflexively going to defend. And I just feel like that's fine if it's warranted, but it can't be that we are just that's the emotion and that's the action that is triggered simply because we are called upon to provide protection for a person who is an individual who, and this is nothing about that individual, but if in your professional capacity, the policies that you have promulgated have been harmful to that people that you are now seeking to cover, then let's have a conversation without the coverage. Let's have a conversation without the reflexive, I'm going to church and I'm not going to go to one church, I'm going to go to 2 churches, every church I'm going to come and visit. Let's have the conversation about your qualifications and capacity and the impact of what you have done on the community without the reflexive, let's first cloak you in prayer and the holy oil and the baptismals. God help. Ain't nothing wrong with the holy oil and the baptism.
No, but it's a disrespect. It's a disrespect to our traditions to use them to cover up for policies and practices which are actually harming our community, right? I mean,
That's right.
And no one likes, and I agree, no one likes to see someone who looks like us be involved in this mess, whether you're mayor or whether you're in uniform. So
yeah. And I need to correct myself. I said documentary. This is a series, Empire City, the untold origin story of the NYPD. So I wanted to correct that because people need to know that this is a multi-part effort that you have taken on as we shift into the real reason that you are here, because I don't want to get you in too much trouble, sir. I don't know what your situation like. So I want to make sure we keep
I think I'm already in trouble.
Yeah, well, there's that. That's why I had to say my commentary before you came on, because I like to keep things compartmentalized if we can. I'm sure I'll be getting some phone calls as well. But the truth has to be told. And that's one of the reasons I don't want to be an elected official or a judge, because I want to be able to remind people how to hold accountable when it comes to systems. And it feels to me like you are doing something similar with this series that's exploring the history of the NYPD. Although you're not new to this form of communication and education, talk to us about this style of journalism that you're engaged in, if you would even call it journalism. I'm not sure if you have another label that you prefer. And then let's talk about what you uncovered in this series and why it matters for this moment.
Well, I do think it's a kind of journalism, and again, Empire City is a
Oh no, he froze.
people's history of the Civil War, and we
Hold
got
on,
millions of
Chenjerai.
listeners. We got the people.
Hold on. Oh, we don't know. You froze. So
Uh-oh.
this is how we know we having a good
No
conversation.
problem.
The devil is mad because you froze. So you just started to talk and then
Yes,
you
yes,
froze.
yes,
So
yes.
start over, and we bind the devil in the name of all that is holy. We need somebody else to
Yes,
pray over that.
exactly. Yeah. No, all right. So I was just saying that my first sort of venture into this was I made a podcast called Uncivil. That's about the history of the Civil War. And it's like a people's history of the Civil War, right? We put Black folks' agency at the center. We put women's agency at the center. All these people who are left out of the dominant narrative. And when I first took on that project, I took it on with my co-creator Jack Hitt. Folks were like, "Oh, that kind of history is boring. It's Civil War. People don't really want to listen to no, Ken Burns documentary, even though, respect to Ken Burns for his skills in the documentary field." But what it turns out, it was the opposite. It was like we had millions of listeners. People were assigning it in schools, listening to it with their families, right? And and we won a Peabody Award. And I had a similar project called Seeing White, which is about the history of whiteness, that I did with John Bewin, that was also extremely popular. In some ways, maybe even more influential. So, I learned that this forum is a way that you can, reach people. And we decided to say, well, if we can do the Civil War, if we can do whiteness, I want to do the history of the police. We talk about the police all the time, right? Like everybody, it seems like there's so many stories about the police that were saturated. But the question that I had when I would talk to people and say, where did the police come from? Where were the first police stations in this country? A
Right.
lot of people really couldn't answer that. And the people who did answer it sometimes would say, oh, well, the police come from slave patrols. And that's certainly an important part of the story, but that's like a sentence. That's not a history. Slave patrols where? And most people didn't
Right.
think it's New York.
Ooh, okay. So break this down for us because often when I've given that answer, I will talk about the slave patrols, but I'm thinking Virginia colony. Like I'm
Right.
not thinking New York. Talk to us about the particular role that New York played in the formation of what we now know to be police.
Well, when we started Empire City, we were actually looking at a lot of Empire cities because there are a lot of Empire cities in America, right?
Huh.
Like I think Atlanta, for example, you look at what's going on with the cop cities there, you could see,
Yeah.
and that was actually an idea we had. But the reason I wanted to start in New York is because of a kind of myth that people perpetuate about where slavery and where racism really happened. People sometimes want to act like New York was free from that because New York is understood as a free state. And in 1827, New York, slavery was legally abolished. But what we explore in Empire City, we come in shortly after that, and what we see is that there was still, kidnapping of free Black people going on, being sent into slavery, and it was happening by the police and by elected, kind of like government officials in New York. So we wanted to look at that, and we felt that exploring that takes you into something that's beyond simply looking at, oh, it was an incidence of police brutality. He had bad training. We're like, no, you now have to attend to the economy of the slave economy, how the slave economy connected the South and New York. And in some ways, how some of those same economic incentives and processes are still in play.
So this is fascinating to me because again, when we talk about slave patrols and we talk about the fact that these were people who were not necessarily even formally a part of any body. These could be deputized white people that say, you white, they not gone and get them because they ran away. But it was also designed to make sure that the indigenous were not going to come back and take their land back. So policing has always had this sort of protect the white supremacist structures and ideologies that has sort of been shrouded or really sort of speak to what America was born into, the genocide and the enslavement. But the idea of formalizing that into a police force and carrying with it those two premonitions is really an important thing to unpack. And then we had just been talking about fugitive slave laws a couple of days ago, and I said that any white person was required to participate, but I didn't talk about the police being a part of the apparatus that was kidnapping innocent Black people, innocent of the crime of being formerly enslaved and having run away. Give us a little sense as to what that history looks like for you.
Well, one thing I just want to say is one reason that I really wanted to focus on the police is because I think the police are a problem for democracy. And this is one of the threads that connects police back then to police now, which is that they, as you said, are the apparatus. Whether you're talking about reproductive rights, whether you're talking about Black people who before 1965 are protesting for voting rights, whether you're whatever it is, the police are the mechanism that gets rolled out to stop people who are trying to make America a democracy or a stronger democracy, depending on your opinion. So we started at the moment right before New York formed its modern police department. And so as you said, the people who were doing this kind of kidnapping, you'll learn, were like, constables. They were sort of like rogue in a way, in the sense that it was not necessarily the job of the There was no NYPD yet, but it was not the job of the sort of rough, loose police kind of department that existed to kidnap people. But what's interesting is that, and there's a conversation to be had about police reform here, because
Mm.
these constables were doing this because there was money involved in it, right? It was an economic incentive. They were entrepreneurial. And if you read the city council documents, they know that something's wrong with this. There's actually a line in one of the city council documents, not to get into the weeds, but right back in like the early 1840s, that says, if the constable stops crime, he deprives himself of bread. Like, that's literally a line in there. So the first police department was already a project of reform, and then once they reformed it, what happens? Now it does become the official job of the NYPD to kidnap Black people. And the first two cases of the fugitive slave law that are going to test whether these northern states are actually going to send and free Black people into slavery are in New York.
Wow. 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK. I am speaking with Chenjerai Kumanyika. Am I pronouncing your name correctly while we have
Chenjerai, but
Chenjerai?
yeah, but you
No,
got it, and I
people
appreciate
screw
it.
my name up, and so my tongue has been colonized. So we tried our best. Chenjerai. Let's talk about what some of these
Right.
episodes delve into. So it's a multi-part series, as I understand it, and drawing from your extensive experience in this sort of format, why break it up into multiple segments? What was the methodology between deciding what was going to be included in each of the segments? Give us a sense as to that science.
Right. Well, we're going to take you on a journey. I mean, ask anybody you know who's listening to Empire City. People are telling me that they're taking off work. They are gluing earbuds to their ears to make sure they don't miss the details. I don't advise that, by the way. You know what I'm saying? But all I'm just trying to tell y'all is that this people are riveted because we go on a journey. This issue of slavery in police, but we don't end there. We get into issues related to the media in police. We talk about things to do with the vice economy and sex work. You're gonna learn from a scholar that one of the historians we talked to, Daniel Citram, that the first uses of the term organized crime. Think about what you think about when you think of organized crime. They weren't referring to the mafia. They were referring to the New York Police Department. And we have all the receipts on that. We're going to flesh that out in a whole story. So it's just a ride. And I got to also say it's a ride that is, I think it's a ride that's a uniter, but not necessarily in a good way. It's a uniter in the sense that, we often talk about the police in terms of black and white, but in the 19th century, see, there was all kinds of folks who were not considered white. Right? Irish were not considered white for a long period of time. Italians were not considered white. Germans, none of those people were considered white. And all those people felt, the wrong end of the NYPD's barrel. So we're gonna explore all of that. Yeah, and I mean I can say a bit more about how we decided if you want, but yeah, that's a little bit of a
I would
preview of
love
what's gonna
to.
happen.
I would love to because there's so much to take in. And one of the challenges that we've been talking a little bit today, and in the first part of the show, we have this segment called the moment of gratitude. And we've been talking about how sometimes fear of not getting it right the first time will create the artists in us from actually being able to walk out and produce the thing that we were sent here to produce. Give us a sense as to the science that you employ to determine how to break, because this is a massive story and it's covering but not in terms of the length of time that you have to cover. Give us a sense as to how thematically you were able to approach breaking it up into the multiple parts.
Well, one thing is that we wanted to show how the police department evolved. That was one decision that we made. And I got to put some love on my team. Diane Hodson, Peter Bresnan, Sam Riddell, Bowen Wong, and Axel Kakutia. You're going to hear some amazing sound. People are telling me it sounds like a movie for my ears. I never heard anything like this. And Axel Kakutia is an incredible producer out in the UK. So the team was an important part of it. The reason why, people say, Chen, I've been fortunate and I'm grateful that I've done a lot of stuff that has won awards. And a lot of it is because the team. I recognize people before, I recognize that talent before people have gotten the flowers, before they're in the lights. I just recognize them and try to treat them with that same respect. So that's the thing. And what we really wanted to do was offer an analysis that got beyond the conversation about, like again, an incident of police brutality, like what we saw on Sutter Ave, which I want to talk about that. But I want to talk about what happened on Sutter Ave a couple of weeks ago, because that's out of the headlines. But there was 4 people shot by the NYPD, including an officer. So we can come back to that. But I wanted to get away from that. And the way we came in was, I have a personal connection. This story is personal for me. I never saw, it started with something about my father. My father died in 1993, and my father was really close to me, but I never saw a moving picture of him, but in 93 we didn't have IG and TikTok, and you can go back and just look at all these pictures on your phone of your family, all these videos. And so I have pictures of him, but not any videos. I thought I would never see a video until I finally did. And it was in an archive of NYPD surveillance. The NYPD was surveilling my father because he was protesting an incident of police brutality in New York in 1964. And this was the first image of my dad. So just imagine, I'm watching my dad. I haven't seen him. I never saw him like this because it's before I was born. I want to hug him because, it's like, my dad. And yet this is he's captured by the NYPD surveillance. So that's kind of like speaking to the past, and it forced me to grapple with the fact that this was a whole unit of the NYPD who was dedicated to stopping people like my father, these civil rights organizers.
Wow.
And so that's one part. And there's a future part too, because it deals with my daughter. But yeah, but that's part of how we came in.
Let's sit in this space for just a minute. We believe in Sankofa approaches to things here. So looking at the history to inform where we
Mm.
are, draw that through line for us between the policing units being perceived as that group of people that could capture kidnapped African people, send them into enslavement, to what we saw, as you just mentioned, in Sutter Avenue just a couple of weeks ago. And again, folks, this gets back to those policies, because when I mentioned that $150 million is poured into adding police to the subways to stop a problem that doesn't even amount to $1 million, we saw the gravity of that when, as you just said, those 4 people were shot in the subway, one of whom died, one of whom was a police officer, over what amounts to less than $3 in a train fare. Give us the through line between where they started and what we're seeing happening today.
Well, I'm going to start with a disclaimer, and I hope you don't mind if I do this. I know people get sick of this, but I just want to say, I know a lot of people who have that uniform on. I was just talking to some current active NYPD 2 days ago, who are both men of color. And I have people in my family. And when you have a force like the NYPD that has 30,000 plus officers, a staggering number, by the way, and it's a majority minority organization, there's all kind of folks in that uniform. Now, if you grew up the way I grew up, you have this sense, like I didn't grow up liking police. I'm gonna be honest with you, because they always were disrespectful. Every interaction I had with them, to me and my community. But I don't assume that everybody who puts on that uniform wants to do harm. I think a lot of people get that job because it's a working class job you can get. I mean, what job can you get out here with some measure of security? You get to put on a uniform. And so, but what you have to recommend, though, what you have to acknowledge is that this system is bigger than people's intentions. I mean, I'll
Yes.
speak for my own institution. I mean, these institutions, including the one I work, NYU, this was not an institution that was built to serve our people, our communities, or anything. And the same is true of the police. The police were not created to serve working class people, to serve Black people. They were created to protect capital. They were created to protect white supremacy. But I say protect capital even more so than white supremacy, because you say protect white supremacy, we just think of like, oh, the police were bigots. People think like that because many of us don't have an understanding of structural racism. But capital, they're out there, trying to sort of police certain areas that they feel are a threat. And I think that anything that's dangerous to that social order, right, is what they were defending, as what they're defending. And my father fit into that, just as free Black people in New York back in the 19th century fit into that, just as Jewish labor activists at the end of the 19th century who were pushing against, when there was depression in New York, and you had Emma Goldberg in the streets, and she's saying, if you're hungry, go right now and take food from the stores, which is what, I mean, look, I'm not in Asheville and out and dealing with people with Helene. I don't want to get those people in trouble. But I
Right.
think people have the right to take food from the stores if you're starving. You know what I mean? So all of those moments are moments that the police were created and evolved to kind of suppress. And I think that that's the through line. So I think it's too simple to say, it's too simple to say nothing's changed. They doing the same thing. I think that's too simple, because what that doesn't acknowledge is that there are ways in which, first, people resisted. And we have to give credit and respect to all those moments that people push back, because folks didn't take this, by just accepting it. The other thing is that the system evolved and in many ways became worse. So we wanted to show each step of the evolution so that you get right to this moment right now.
That's not something we often contemplate when we're fighting for change. Yeah, you might change for the better, or you could change for the worse. And sometimes when you're not prepared for what that worse can look like, you end up in a situation that then becomes beyond what you can navigate and manage. So let's go back to this Sutter Avenue situation. And thank you for the disclaimer. I think it's a perfectly acceptable disclaimer to give. It does get on people's nerves, but it's also valid, because there are people who are just like in the military. I'm a military family child, so I get, like,
That's
a lot
it.
of people who I know who serve. They wasn't trying to just be all about Americana. They need to put food on the plate and support their family. And so they made economic decisions. So we don't begrudge any of that. But I appreciate that you said this system is bigger than your individual desires to do good. That's why systems often trump the capacity of individuals. So what did you see when you, as someone who is knee deep in this, and I'm seeing that the audience is very excited to delve into this series, this docuseries, Empire City, NYPD. What did you see as we were all looking at what happened at Sutter Avenue, where those 4 people were shot in a subway? What were you seeing in light of what you now understand about the history of the NYPD?
Well, again, I mean, I'm in the midst of kind of releasing this series, and I see, I start seeing the news coverage that essentially they first started out. The first thing I saw was Mayor Adams actually saying a police officer was shot, right? That was literally the first thing I saw, right? And then I kind of got I'm getting it through social media. I'm seeing the other details. And so what actually unfolded was that someone was accused of, and there's camera, you can see it looks like the person skipped the fare, right? And then the person tries to go and get on the train, right? A 290 fare. The police pursue this person. He's trying to get away from the camera. He's trying to get away from them. He keeps saying, leave me alone. I just want to get on the train. They tase him, right? After they tase him, they then shoot 4 people, right? They shoot him, but in the process, they shoot 2 bystanders, him, and then one of the other officers is killed by by the other officer, not killed, shot. So the fact that all of this, in a way, is like in a nutshell what you need to know about the NYPD. Who was made safer by this? The whole motivating incident was a 290 fare. And for those of you who are thinking, yeah, but if people skip the fare, then how are we going to pay the subway bill? I saw a statistic that says something like all the fare beating totals roughly in the neighborhood of 100,000. But the NYPD has paid 150 million of overtime, right? They're paid millions of dollars to be in there playing Candy Crush or whatever they're doing, or shooting people. So the economics don't work out. You didn't make anybody safer. You shot an officer, and the mayor has defended these people, saying they showed restraint. And then the other thing, and I'm sorry to get hyped, but it's like I was in Brownsville. I'm sorry. I know I'm supposed to be dispassionate journalist, but it's real, because I was in Brownsville and I saw how the community felt about this.
There's no such thing as a dispassionate journalist. There's no such thing as objectivity. Everyone is bringing it. So the passion is what helps.
Come on, man.
Story. Yeah.
And people were in that community, and they were just talking about this. So I think the other thing is that just on the basic level of disrespect, the man who was shot, who was the sort of center of this, they didn't even tell his mother he was shot. They dropped off a card at her door. She found out that way. And one of the bystanders has, I think, he's been declared brain dead. And as far as I know, I haven't really seen the mayor. Like, the mayor didn't go to the hospital of the bystanders, right? The mayor went to the police officer. And so I just think this whole set of priorities really is in a nutshell, shows you the priorities. And it reminds me of so many incidents I saw in the history where the way that the institution is functioning is not actually designed to keep people safe. I mean, look, I had an officer tell me, and I'm not going to say who I want to protect him. Officer said, honestly, he said, I can't say this out loud, but honestly, he said, I would have said, I don't care if 4, 5, 6 people hop the fare. You want to keep people safe.
Right. And we've had Officer Edmund Raymond on the show, and I can't remember the name of his book at the moment, but he's done a phenomenal book. He's done a lot of work to really expose the realities of the NYPD. Were you gonna say something?
You're gonna hear from Edwin Raymond in our show. Sorry to interrupt you, Lurie.
Really?
But I got respect. I got respect for Edwin Raymond. His book is called An Inconvenient Cop. And y'all see all these books here? Trust me, I went deep on this, y'all. But let me tell you something. The analysis of a Black police officer who was on the force for 15 years and was a lieutenant, he had a critique and analysis of police. And Edwin and I, we have debates about this stuff, right? Edwin, he's a very hopeful person, and he has to live in that hope space. But everybody should check that out, just to say.
No, I appreciate you so much. And will you come back on? Because I feel like I want to delve into your other series as well. That one, Civil, you got my brain fired. I'm like, we could do a whole mini series just unpacking
Let's do it.
So will you please let my team know what your availability is? I would love to have you come back on the show. And the reality that we have, there was a 14-minute press conference. I know you have to go out, so I'm going to just say this quickly.
No, I'm listening.
14-minute press conference where Eric Adams, the mayor, was speaking about this incident. And I was 8.5 minutes in before anything was said about the fact that there were other people who had been shot besides this police officer. And that, to me, spoke to and then it was mentioned briefly in the briefest of ways, but that was like really one of those moments that just sort of solidified this is fundamentally wrong. The way that we have structured whose life has value is just fundamentally wrong. And when we overlay that with the power of policing, we don't question and we don't interrogate the way you have done in this phenomenal series, that leaves us open to just being ineffective at securing the resources that we need. I'm going to ask all of you all to go to the website. Jonah is tweeting it out. This is a phenomenal series. I'm looking forward to exploring all of the episodes, and it is getting rave reviews. interviews. And our guest here is someone who knows about which he speaks, and he's not new to this platform or to this format of storytelling and history making and journalism. And so I'm really grateful for you, sir. What's, for the audience's sake, what's the best way for them to reach you? How can they follow you? Where can they get access to the docuseries? Give us those details.
It's wherever you get podcasts, primarily Apple, Spotify. I think you can get it on Amazon Music. You can reach me. I'm on Twitter at Catch a Tweet Down, or my name Chenjerai on IG. But in the meantime, I'm gonna be listening to the Lurie Daniels Favors show. You know what I mean? I'm gonna stay tuned to that, because that's where I'm gonna get the analysis and step up. So happy to be here, and I can't wait till next time.